Disney's own art form of the animated movie musical is dying. But why? Where did it all go wrong? It's easy to point at movies like Wish or Moana 2 and blame the generic music, cringy lyrics, and vague, apathetic storytelling on inexperienced songwriting teams or an over-reliance on pop music conventions. But the truth is, this rot did not just suddenly manifest overnight. It has slowly been spreading for a long time now, and what I discovered has changed my opinion on Disney forever, even as a big Disney fan, even as someone who became a performer because of Disney. If Disney does not change, the Disney movie musical is going to die. And here's why.
Disney has a tremendous commitment to telling great stories, which I think is the fundamental principle of animation.
They gave us a structure to work with. They structured the story like they would have structured it if it were being performed on the stage.
He knows how important it is to be brought into each new project from the start.
You can't do that kind of thing just overlaid over another story. You need to be right there from the very beginning.
We'll look through the whole story of the show and say, okay, I think we'll do a song there. And
Howard and Alan actually moved to Los Angeles, and they had offices right there in the animation building.
I was sort of the last man on the team.
Yeah, we didn't have any storyboards for most of it, either a couple pages of the script or we'd have maybe one storyboard image.
I mean, we're competing against modern movies when this comes out.
And I was told on the plane as I was flying out, your job is just to execute the ideas that they already have.
It's neat because animation might be one of the last, maybe the last great place to do Broadway musicals is in animation.
My journey down this rabbit hole started with this tweet. You ever needed a clear understanding of how Disney has fallen off quality-wise? Go back and listen to every lyrical song produced by Disney from then to now, and you can pinpoint the exact movie they lost that touch. But it's not what OP said here that inspired me to create this video. It was that, hilariously, despite OP saying you can pinpoint the exact movie, everyone who replied, including OP, had different answers. But I believed that the answer was out there and that I could use my own frame of reference as a professional musical theater performer and songwriter to find it. I went on a quest to find a definitive answer, spending quite frankly too much of my life reading interviews, watching documentaries, and digging deep into DVD bonus features for any clues that would help me solve this case. What was the exact movie where everything changed forever? What did I find through my research, and what conclusion did this lead me to? And how did this movie cause the butterfly effect that led us to where we are today? And when I tell you guys that I was digging, I do mean digging. The reason why I'm so confident that this will be one of the strongest takes on this matter, and also one that you've literally never heard before, is because the biggest clue that made everything else fall into place was an interview from an iconic Disney songwriter that only had 11 views. Good day, everybody. It is Calxiyn Cares Too Much here to make you care. Thank you to all the patrons and the YouTube members who allow me to answer the questions that no one asked, but you will definitely realize you always needed the answer to. In order to talk about what the exact movie is, let's talk about what the exact movie is not. Basically, what I've ruled out and why. It is not Moana 2, and it is not Wish, as much as we love to hate them, and these movies may have music that ranges from forgettable to straight up terrible. They are a symptom of an already existent problem. Like, they are the natural consequences resulting from philosophies about the creative process that existed long before these movies did. Pop music style may be detrimental to these movies as musicals, but what I really want to dispel is the idea that the answer to all this is just like pop music writers are the root of all evil, because it's not. They're not. Some people will cite the start of the downfall with Lin-Manuel Miranda's involvement with Disney for both the animated musicals as well as the live-action ones. Though we are focusing on the animated musicals today, the remade movie musicals are also suffering from the same issue that I'm working up to revealing here. Though Moana and Encanto were still received very positively, a lot of theater professionals find his work with Disney leaving a lot to be desired in comparison to his Broadway work, especially lyrically. I think that the hate for him is over-exaggerated and unwarranted a lot of the time. I think people will say that they love theater, but then they can't tolerate theater kids, you know what I mean? Like, look at how quickly people went from being sick of him to begging for him to come back after finding out who was songwriting for Moana 2. The internet has been unfair and very fickle to this man, I think. However, there is still merit in the sentiment that all the movies that he has worked on have these moments that feel very off. Though I have some issues with the philosophy behind some lyrics in Encanto and Moana, and I have issues with sometimes feeling like musically they are dipping too far into contemporary pop versus contemporary Broadway, and I also feel like that the visuals sometimes get into more like music video in the void compared to this choreographed stage production number. Even though I feel all of those things, Lin-Manuel Miranda is not the cause. I think that Encanto is the best movie musical in the CG lineup, and if it wasn't for Lin-Manuel Miranda, I think we would be in deeper shit than we already are. Unlike Wish, where it seems like the entire creative team felt obligated to make a musical movie versus genuinely feeling like their story had to be a musical, Lin-Manuel Miranda clearly cares about these movies being musicals. He has talked at length about the importance of establishing a thematic question for these musical movies and threading that throughout the rest of the story. And this is crucial for musical theater, most of us all know this. However, the other Disney movie musicals sometimes do not do that, and so it's very important to me that he said it. Despite my problems with other things, this is an area where Encanto and Moana really succeed compared to something like, say, Frozen 2, which I do think is objectively just worse as a musical. Encanto also borrows from theater a lot more, getting us closer to a traditional musical than we have been in a long time. So in terms of where his musicals with Disney get weird or get cringy, this is speculation, so take it with a grain of salt. But based on the information we have about other productions that we will get to, I think that the songs that are a bit more suspicious in quality in terms of like Moana and Encanto and The Little Mermaid, that is the obvious one, right? Like, to me, I think that those were the you want your radio hit, like, here you go songs. Now, obviously, Scuttlebutt doesn't really qualify as a radio hit, but I think that the same principle applies in terms of, oh, we need a song for the children, here you go. Like, I think, in my opinion, that Lin-Manuel Miranda picks one or two songs as, like, the sacrificial lambs to appease the higher-ups, so he can go off and do whatever he wants on the other ones. And we know that pre-CG, this has happened in Disney history before, specifically with songs like Can You Feel the Love Tonight, Colors of the Wind, and Someday in Hunchback, which ended up being cut, but anyways, right? Like, those are songs which are intentionally a bit more generic for marketing, and they're not really trying to hide it. Even though in present day we could say that Disney is more desperate to recapture the magic of Frozen, and I feel like that has definitely influenced the musicals that came after, there have always been concessions when it has come to finding ways to have mass market appeal. There have always been the vague songs, there have always been the pop song cover of like the title song at the end of the movie and stuff like that, and those concessions did not completely stop these complex, layered production numbers like We Don't Talk About Bruno from being made. Lin-Manuel Miranda has said some things that lead into the actual issue that I am building towards, so he did give us some clues during my, like, investigation, if we want to call it that. But I found enough evidence to suggest that, again, the issue predates him. He did not cause it. It is really unfortunate because we got so close to returning to form with Encanto, but it seems like an outlier, and now after all of this, I understand why, and you guys will too. But with the mention of Frozen, we have to talk about the Frozen franchise. And to do that, I watched the Frozen 2 production documentary. And as enlightening as it was also so fucking infuriating. Like, I sat here literally yelling at the TV with my mom. We were both yelling by the end of it. Like, as a year out from releasing the movie, they had no idea who the voice calling Elsa was. It was one of the most frustrating things I have ever seen as someone who is usually delighted to see a documentary or behind the scenes, you know, director's commentary or those DVD features, right, where they talk about, oh, the making of. I would have been happier not knowing this. I'm just joking. I'm glad we know about it because it's important. But anyway, throughout the documentary, multiple people on the creative team pin the blame on Show Yourself, saying that Show Yourself was wrong, that the hook was wrong, that the song was a problem, when Jennifer Lee herself, not only as the director and screenwriter for this movie, but as the chief creative officer of the entire studio at the time, did not have the answer to the thematic question that the entire journey of the movie hinged on. I have a lot of thoughts about this, and we will get into that again later. But I don't think that the problem starts with Frozen, even though the Frozen 2 documentary especially highlights other symptoms of the problem. If I hadn't found evidence that predated Frozen, Frozen probably would have been the answer, because there are major issues here with how the musical element is regarded by the other departments, especially in the Frozen 2 documentary, and it pisses me off. It is very telling for what we are going to discuss that the Lopez needed to rescue the plot, pitching the voice to be Elsa's mother literally at the last minute when the people who were actually in charge of making that decision were refusing to make one. It is very telling to me that the Lopezes were expected to just read minds, and they were blamed for their song being too vague or having no clarity, when the decision about the voice calling Elsa should have been made by Jennifer Lee at the very beginning of the story's development. That's the reason why the story is being made. That's the reason why you want to tell it, right? That's the thematic question that needs to be threaded throughout the entire narrative. So how can you not know? I don't care if you find it out 2 years in development, that's fine. 4 years in development, that's okay. But it can't be 8 months from the movie releasing in the theaters. It just can't. You can't write a story that has a through line, a story that has a thematic question that way. Even with the first Frozen, the Lopezes talk about having written 27 songs at one point, and that because the movie was still being built at the same time they were writing the music, the process was incredibly grueling. So as we're about to get into what the movie was that changed everything, some of you may be thinking like, Cal, why go through all the movies that it wasn't? Why not just start at the movie that it was? And I want to impart this on all of you. Everything that I have shown you so far and the things that I have yet to show you all led me to this conclusion, that something is wrong in production, that there is a problem. But how much or how little this problem is covered up depends on the skill of the songwriter, depends on someone like Lin-Manuel Miranda handling it versus someone like Julia Michaels. All of the songwriters have dealt with the exact same problem. So I didn't want people going into this video thinking, oh, it's because of Jennifer Lee or something like that, right? It's not because of a specific individual. It is about creative philosophy, and that philosophy tracks through the entire studio. And it did not start with Wish, or Moana, or Encanto, or Frozen. Where things really changed in terms of how the music was regarded and implemented in these musical movies was Tangled. Where everything went wrong was actually with Tangled, and I know that many of us who love Tangled do not want to hear that, but let me explain, because you will be shocked by the time I'm done laying this out about how the philosophy when it came to how musical theater storytelling is integrated into the movies changed forever on Tangled. Tangled had an incredibly troubled production history, and though we don't know everything, there is evidence of about 4 radically different phases or shifts, if you want to call it that. So first we have Rapunzel, and this is the original pitch, which was going to be darker and more similar to the Brothers Grimm fairy tale. Some people who have worked on it have compared it to Hunchback, which gives us a good idea in terms of the tone. Secondly, we have the Shrek version, and no, I am not joking. After the success of Shrek, Michael Eisner wanted Disney to have its own movie musical to respond to Shrek, to mock the traditional fairy tale tropes like Shrek had done, but Disney doing it, their own company. Glenn Keane, who was originally the director and is also a legendary Disney animator, wanted the movie to be animated using the traditional 2D animation process, but Disney executives said that they would only approve the film for production if it was using 3D. Weird Shrek Rapunzel was worked on, you can find videos on YouTube about it. But thirdly, we go back to Rapunzel 2.0, where Glenn Keane felt like that there was a more sincere story to tell, and so he went back to his original pitch. But the reason why I call this 2.0 is because even though going back to a more sincere story was in the cards, going back to 2D was not. So we have the original pitch, but we don't have the original animation style anymore. They were still going to make it 3D. And then finally, we get Tangled. But why is all of this important for the questions that we're asking today? It's because we need to talk about Disney's desperation here. They were desperate. There was this race for Disney to have a movie that was in the same league as Beauty and the Beast or The Little Mermaid, but without going back to 2D. Like, they were desperate to develop the 3D technology that would be capable of that. The competitors are getting ahead of them. They haven't made a 3D musical yet. They need to respond. As if getting jerked around from a Hunchback-like 2D fairy tale to a Shrek-like modern-day isekai back to a traditional Disney movie wasn't enough of a burden on everybody working on it, quite frankly, but also the story, right? Because that sort of thing influences the tone, the plot, and the characterization. Now they had to figure out and basically, invent this 3D technology. In this Tangled Q&A I found, the team explains that they wanted it to feel like a Disney movie, but at the same time, they felt pressured to compete with contemporary movies. They actually bring up Shrek in this interview and Shrek's success, reiterating that, respectfully, secure the bag, they did not want to be Shrek, but at the same time, they couldn't afford to go back to a 1950s tale stylistically when their competitors were making stuff like Shrek. I get the impression that even after the Shrek version was canned, that Disney's main motivation here was a race to develop a princess fairy tale movie with this technology so they could win against their competitors. Higher-ups wanted to do what other studios were doing, but more technologically impressive, prettier, I guess you could say, right? Whereas the creative team talks about wanting to have the sincerity of the original Disney movies, the sincerity the studio was known for, but with this new technology. Now, in terms of the art direction and the animation, it seems like they found a compromise. Glenn Keane was able to stylistically steer the film, and you'll see them talk about this through the style guides that are shown in interviews and Q&As for the movie, pulling things from the older Disney movies like curves and the environment and things like that, and also hearing the animators talk about what Glenn Keane would do. He would draw on top of the 3D models and be like, okay, you gotta fix the eye, you gotta fix this, you gotta do that, right? Because that way it would be more fluid and more 2D-like. And so I can tell through all of those things that he cared a lot about visually making Tangled still feel like Disney. However, in terms of storytelling fidelity, Glenn Keane had to step down as the director for Tangled. He had a heart attack, and so he had to step down, even though he had this influence on the art style and the animation, as we hear. In terms of the storytelling, that got handed off to other directors and screenwriters. And this is where, during my research, things started to get very eye-opening. I read that a couple weeks before some major changes at Disney, Rapunzel had actually gotten canceled, and the reason why it started back up again, the reason why it was resurrected, was because of John Lasseter and Ed Catmull, the co-founders of Pixar, and people from Pixar were brought over to work on Rapunzel. So now, with the co-founders of Pixar being in charge of the entire studio, we have a new problem. We went from Disney executives wanting to make Rapunzel into a DreamWorks movie to now Disney executives wanting to make Rapunzel into a Pixar movie. And to illustrate why this is a problem, here's what Alan Menken had to say. As several Pixar employees being in charge for Disney and the sensibilities being changed, Menken thought it was his biggest creative challenge and said that finding a way that we could wed musical theater storytelling with the Pixar style of storytelling was primary. The Pixar style of storytelling. Now listen, I like some of the Pixar movies, I am far from a Pixar hater, but that is a massive red flag for the questions that this video sought to answer. Sure, visually, Glenn Keane made sure that stylistically, Tangled pays homage to the old Disney movies. But the story sensibilities had changed, and the storytelling, the writing, was influenced by Pixar style, not Disney style. I mean, the guy who wrote the screenplay had only written for Cars and Bolt before getting Tangled. This is not the company just changing and evolving. It is not an evolution, it is an assimilation. It's mimicking the style of another studio's vision just because that studio was finding more success at the time versus Disney centering Disney philosophy as they embarked into this new age. The level may vary, but every single musical that has released since Tangled has had the Pixar stank, and most Disney fans did not want it. We did not want Pixar, but it's a fairy tale this time. We did not want the Pixar stank, which is why so many people are split on Tangled in the first place. So, is it's because of Pixar-style storytelling the answer? No, just like how the whole 3D kerfuffle is also not the answer. It is a contributing factor. It is important to remember that those pieces are still in play in this game, along with the Pixar influence. Disney really cared about proving to the world that they could make a modern Disney princess musical that looked visually stunning in 3D. And now we have Pixar influence to help them do it. So because of Alan Menken's quote, I decided to go down the rabbit hole of interviews and podcasts where he or Glenn Slater talked about working on Tangled. And what was immediately very odd was that on the Tangled DVD that has the Untangled Making of Tangled documentary, neither one of them are there to talk about the music at all. This is in stark contrast to the other Disney DVDs which have documentary or behind-the-scenes style videos where there are entire sections dedicated to the songs and the score. Now, I will say that the behind-the-scenes stuff on this DVD in general seems really half-assed compared to like Beauty and the Beast or Hunchback. Those things were like filmed for adults, whereas this Making of Tangled documentary seemed to be filmed for like children, but that still struck me as a little odd. Like, even for children, wouldn't you have the songwriters talking about how they made the music? Anyway, because there was nothing there on the Tangled DVD, I had to go digging, and I will link everything in the description for you guys to listen to because I'm going to paraphrase some things for time, and if you're an aspiring songwriter, I highly recommend listening to these interviews in full because especially for the Glenn Slater interviews, like the advice that he gives is gold. It is criminal how few views they have. But let's talk about it. So what was so damning in these interviews? Glenn Slater, in this interview, shares a very interesting anecdote. That on the plane to go work on Tangled with Alan Menken, he was told, they have a very clear idea of what they want to do. Your job is not to come up with new ideas of what they want to do, it's just to execute the ideas they already have.
Stephen left, and they very hurriedly rushed me in. And I was told on the plane as I was flying out, they have a very clear idea of what they want to do. Your job is not to come up with new ideas of what they want to do. It's just to execute the ideas that they already have. And we were under pretty severe time constraints. So an incredibly exciting opportunity, but one that already I had my hands tied a little bit.
The context of this was that Stephen Schwartz had left as a lyricist, seemingly because of irreconcilable creative differences. It is a little unclear about who said this. Like, did Alan Menken say it in terms of quoting someone else? Was this Alan Menken's opinion and he just said it to Glenn Slater? Or was this like a mysterious third party, like a representative from the team who was, bringing them on the plane? But the reality is, at least to me, is that it doesn't really matter. Because it's not like Glenn Slater said this like, oh, this is what I was told and then I was pleasantly surprised. That's not what he said. He said this anecdote, he shared this, and then said, I knew I was going into a situation where my hands were going to be tied. He never expressed that they were untied at some point, right? I'm not saying that the director said it to them, but what I am saying is that how they felt is consistent with what Alan Menken says. I felt like I had been run over when I heard that. That is just insane when we think about what made the musicals in the Disney Renaissance so great and why they have been getting worse and worse since Tangled. If Howard Ashman let the Little Mermaid team execute the ideas that they wanted to do instead of giving his opinion, the company would have gone bankrupt. But we will revisit this quote after looking through Glenn Slater's other stories about Tangled's production. He said in this interview that when they got the assignment to write I See the Light, all they knew is that Rapunzel and Flynn were on the rowboat and it was this sort of awkward moment, and presumably that they had to fall in love here. So they wrote this big Broadway ballad, this a whole new world feeling thing, and when Glenn Slater and Alan Menken played the song for whoever they were meeting with, let's just call them Tangled Team said, well, it's not what we were hoping for the scene. Well, we wanted something that was a little less show tune, mind you, in their movie musical. But anyway, so Alan Menken wrote another melody, and Tangled Team said, that's a little more poppy, like pop music-y, but that's not what we had in mind. I shit you not. Glenn Slater says back in the other interview, because he's told this story multiple times, that he and Alan Menken were there for 5 or 6 hours, and Alan Menken wrote 30 different compositions. And finally, the Tangled Team said, can we show you the visuals we have? And they pulled out the painting of the lantern scene. And Glenn Slater says that he went, oh, you're worried that this song is going to upstage the visuals. And the Tangled Team said, yes, we want this all to be about those lanterns. We don't want it to be about Alan's big ballad.
And so it was just all very intense. We were just thrown in quickly, and the script would change on a weekly basis, and half of what we were working on got thrown out. We wrote a song that was sort of a big, soaring, muscular ballad. And we played it for them and for the directors. And they said, well, it's beautiful, we like it. And there was that implied but. They said, well, it just feels like every other Disney ballad there's ever been. It just feels so big and Broadway. And so Alan said down at the piano, and he said, well, how about this? And he whipped out a melody that I listened to and said, oh my God, that's going to be a hit song. He said, well, it doesn't do this, it doesn't do that. I said, well, how about this? He whipped out another melody. And again, he heard, he said, that's going to be enormous. And no, that's a little too Renaissance-y, or something else.
And it was like, oh, you're worried that the song is going to upstage the visual. They're like, yes, we want this all to be about those lanterns. We want it to be about that majestic moment, and we don't want it to be about Alan's big ballad.
We sat there for, I think, 5 or 6 hours with Alan just ripping out melody after melody, any one of which could have been a fantastic song. As they got torn down, I mean, it was like, having a piece of your heart ripped away. It was like, oh my God, I wish I could have written that one. I wish I could have written that one. And then finally he came up with a piece of music that was just very simple and very short and very sweet. And as soon as they heard it, they said, that's the one.
And so Alan wrote a melody that was very tranquil. It didn't build, it's not histrionic, it doesn't feel dramatic, it just sort of sits in a place.
And because of the deadlines, I basically had it, it was now 6 o'clock at night, we'd been there all day, and I got the music down on tape, ran off to my hotel room, sat up all night. I came in with what ends up being I See the Light, and I had basically 10 hours to work on it, and I said, well, this isn't the right title, and I just repeated the chorus twice, I'm going to have to change that. And Alan sat down and said, okay, let's just see what it is, and he played it, and everybody said, oh my God, that's it, stop, don't do another thing, don't change a word. I said, but, these are the final words, this is just a draft. Nope, they said, this is it, I'm not changing anything.
Whether or not they didn't want to insult Alan by saying, we don't want you to upstage our song, which is what I think it was, but when we eventually got it, we were like, oh, okay.
So Glenn Slater's perspective is that they were trying to dance around it because they did not want to insult Alan Menken, but what the Tangled Team had been trying to say was, we don't want you to upstage our scene. So I shit you not, you guys, the night before this script was going to be recorded, I was doing research for a completely separate video, like thinking I had finally found everything that we were done. And the truth is I probably haven't found everything. There is probably more out there, but we gotta keep going, right? But anyway, all of that to say, I found this buried article from 2011. And so if Glenn Slater's story didn't already make you feel frustrated like it did for me, let me read this to you. I'll let you read the question. So this is Alan Menken. Respectful, yeah, and we're separated by at least 20 years of age. People want to establish their own ground. So when you bring in the sort of old master, that can be a little bit daunted. So on one hand, they're respectful. On the other hand, they go, no, Alan, we don't want that. We want this. And there are times where I have to go, Zip's mouth. There's a place in the movie where I had a concept for the score. We had initially had a song for the character Flynn, where he sang a sea shanty. He was singing about what he wanted in life, and his father used to sing him this lullaby. So it's a lusty sea shanty, and he sings it wistfully. And then later on, she sings it to him in a tender way. And the song got cut. Okay, fine. But when we meet Flynn, I said I can almost see this being a Robin Hood moment and really going for that swashbuckling, big, thematic chase. And so I wrote the cut that way, and the director said, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, no. There was a lot of nervousness, and there was a temptation to get defensive and say, guys, this is what we talked about. Sorry, I'll try it again, ... exclamation point. I read this last night and I was fucking flabbergasted, like I'm not even shitting you guys? What the fuck do you mean that Alan fucking Megan feels like he has to zip's mouth and keep his mouth shut? Like, we will talk about this later, but I don't think that it's defensive to assert, guys, this is what we talked about. In fact, it sounds like that based on what we are going to continue talking about, that we needed more of that. Remember when I said that if Howard Ashman let the Little Mermaid team execute the ideas that they wanted to do instead of giving his opinion, Disney would have gone bankrupt? In this same interview, he says, the way I see it is that there's a wide spectrum of what a musical is. At one end of the spectrum, you could say there is Hunchback and Beauty and the Beast. At the other end of the spectrum, I'm talking Disney musicals now, you could say Tarzan and Emperor's New Groove, which are basically pop-driven, and then there's all the stuff in between. And at any part of the process, they're going to be going, we want this, no, we want that, no, that, we want that. So it's always navigating what kind of musical is this. And frankly, Tangled is certainly far from your classic break-in-a-song musical. It's essentially an action-adventure romantic comedy with songs. If people respond to the songs, it could become a musical. That could happen. At the same time, it could almost be something that exists without songs. That is all really, really awful. For you guys that have watched me for a long time now, you may already understand why these stories are so incredibly frustrating to me. This is a medium of collaboration. Just like how we say for theater, it's a team sport. Yes, the visuals are important for an animated movie. I understand and I appreciate this. But this mentality of we don't want you to upstage our scene. We want this to be all about the lanterns, and by proxy, creating this dynamic where it's like, we want this to be about us, the visual teams, not about you, not about Alan's big ballad. And this about us versus this about you goes against what a musical is. The idea of it can be something that exists without songs goes against what a musical is. Treating the songwriters as just being there to execute the ideas of the directors who have never directed a musical before, I'd argue also goes against the spirit of what a musical is. And it feels like treating these songwriters as tools or machines that just pump out music rather than storytellers in their own right. A story is made into a musical because that is the only way that the story can function and exist. And the songs should serve the story above all else. And the visuals should serve the songs above all else, not the other way around. I am not ignorant to the fact that there are notes constantly flying back and forth and that everything is constantly influenced by each other and there's give and take and whatever. I understand the importance of collaboration and compromise. But as a starting point, the pipeline should be stories, songs, then visuals, not story, visuals, then songs. It doesn't make sense when it comes to creating good art. And by visuals, I don't just mean something like the lantern scene, like the storyboarding for a particular scene. I'm talking about the environments that the story is told in, how the characters look, even how they move. All of that should be influenced by the songs, which means that the songs need to exist before the visuals do. And what's so crazy to me is that the Tangled team did not want the songs to overshadow the reception of the visuals, did not want the songs to be better or perceived as better by the public than the visuals, in what is supposed to be a musical. And now we know why, because it wasn't treated as a musical, apparently. It was treated as this mysterious third Pixar thing. This is why I made sure to harp on and on about the pressure to create this movie with 3D animation, because from my perspective, Disney wanted people to go like, wow, this looks amazing. This is the best looking 3D animation ever. They wanted to win this competition with the other studios to be the best. And in present day, this has evolved to not just having the best, right? Like, oh, the best water, the best looking ice and snow, the best crowd scenes, the best hair, whatever. It means this race to the bottom in terms of realism and And that's why we have things like the Lion King remake and the Little Mermaid live action, where now in Disney's mind, quality is determined by how realistic Sebastian looks. Glen Keane wanted Tangled to still look 2D despite the demand that it be in 3D, but the attention from the top was wanting that glory of perfecting this 3D technology. It feels a lot like how gaming is right now, right? Where there's this pressure to create games that look so realistic, right? And like better graphics mean better game. Not that the graphics should be stylized in a way that best serves the story the game wants to tell. For some games, ultra realistic is the best way to tell the story. It is the way to go. But not every game needs to be that, and so we've lost the idea of style. And what is so frustrating and odd is that if they wanted the lantern scene to take precedence, why didn't they just show Glenn Slater and Alan Menken the visual from the beginning instead of giving them vague information? Why do that? It seems based on the interview that Glenn Slater and Alan Menken were first asked to work on it without even seeing the scene. And when they did see it, they had to understate their own song because Tangled team didn't want it to be about Alan. And you can see the impact of this decision reflected in the critical reviews for Tangled. Wikipedia has an entire section on this song being polarizing, with critics having said at the time that the song was generic, earplug worthy, which I think is ridiculous, but apparently it was said, lacking substance, dull, and cliche. People were ripping this song to shreds. But the lantern sequence is breathtaking and the most dazzling pieces of moving artwork executed in any animated movie ever. Leading up to the release of the film, Tangled's co-directors continued to hype up the scene, constantly boasting that I See the Light will be the most spectacular animated sequence you've ever seen. And that's just the thing, isn't it? They said the quiet part out loud here, and ever since, Disney has been saying, we care more about visuals than songs. A song services the visuals, not the story. And this is in combination with your job is not to come up with new ideas of what they want to do. It's just to execute the ideas they already have. Like, my mind keeps going back to that quote because it is crazy. That is not how the creative process at Disney used to work. During the Disney Renaissance, Howard Ashman got the script for The Little Mermaid and sent back detailed notes with musical and dramatic suggestions, giving his opinion on the early treatment of the film. A version of the script had been written, and then Howard Ashman gave his input, and then they, Katzenberg, Clements, Musker, and Ashman all revised the story together. Everyone sat down and retooled the script. With Howard Ashman making key decisions on characters like Ariel for her I Want, Ursula for her character and personality inspiration, and Sebastian for what he would pull from sonically, that meant that all the other departments now had an idea of what they were working with. Imagine a scenario where they had made Ursula first, and it was so far into the production that there was no changing Ursula, right? And that her design was not fitting at all for a song like Poor Unfortunate Souls. In that case, you'd either have to write a new song or try desperately to fit this square peg into a round hole. But because of the order of operations here, they could have Ursula best embody the characterization that Ashman was going to give her through song. For Beauty and the Beast, when Howard Ashman started to get very ill, they also retooled the script in a similar way, and production was actually flying story artists back and forth so he could approve the storyboards. Songwriters are storytellers, and the songwriters were in there retooling the script so everyone could be on the same page and key decisions could be made early. To me, songwriters do, or should, write the screenplay, because the songs are the screenplay, not just garnishing on top of a script that was written without any musical theater sensibilities. And it's not just Howard Ashman either. Tim Rice worked very closely with the screenwriting team for The Lion King, and his lyrics were pinned to storyboards during development. It sounds like the lyrics informed the visuals. For Hunchback and Pocahontas, Stephen Schwartz was heavily involved with the writing team as well. Songs like Bells of Notre Dame, for example, which weren't thought of by the script writers right away, were storyboarded to music that him and Alan Menken wrote after they suggested that this lengthy exposition sequence that the screenwriters had written should have been an opening song. Story, then songs, then visuals. There is a reason why the lyricists were retooling entire scripts back then. And there is a reason why Glenn Slater describes Howard Ashman as being handed the reins to create a new art form and how impactful that was on the Disney movie musical. And not even just the Disney movie musical, musicals everywhere because musicals were dying. And this is in comparison to, I cannot stress this enough, your job is not to come up with new ideas of what they want to do, it's just to execute the ideas they already have. But now we have a new question. Why did this keep happening after Tangled? Because Tangled was a very specific, very unique pressure cooking type situation, right? Why would this keep happening again and again? Why wasn't this the outlier? Maybe it would have been if not for the fact that every Disney movie musical since has copied from Tangled. The problem is that Tangled was already not a traditional musical, and now every movie has been copying from it. Alan Menken said that in the interview I found last night, and he also said it again in a different interview. Aware that Tangled would not be a traditional musical like Beauty and the Beast or The Hunchback of Notre Dame, Menken described the film as a hybrid. Tangled is a hybrid. Not only was it injected with Pixar-style storytelling, but maybe because it got injected with said Pixar-style storytelling, it became a hybrid. It is not a traditional Disney movie musical, it's a hybrid. Think about every single Disney movie that has come after and why there's something a little off about all of them now through those eyes. The 2D animated Snow Queen, which Alan Menken was working on, until apparently he wasn't, got cancelled, or at least it got converted at some point to Frozen. Why didn't they want to do 2D animation? I don't know, but do you think that Tangled's success has something to do with it? Maybe. So now instead of the 2D Snow Queen, we have Frozen trying to follow up Tangled, which means that Frozen needs to have a lot of the same storytelling conventions as Tangled, which means that Frozen pointed to the success of a hybrid and built their understanding of what the Disney movie musical is and should be like in 3D based on a hybrid. Then Moana pointed at Frozen, and so on and so on. It's a photocopy of a photocopy of a photocopy. And it's not just a music problem. These are things that you have probably heard other YouTubers talk about before, like the adorkable trend. That started with Rapunzel, and it has just been copied and pasted into every character since, even in situations where it makes literally no sense. Even Moana, in Moana 2, is hit with this like clumsy slapstick comedy beam as if she's Marinette from season 6 of Miraculous Ladybug. It doesn't make any sense, but they just copy and pasted it because, oh, that was successful in Tangled, let's just do it again. Flynn is cynical and fuck you got mine, which works because he's a thief, and it works to serve as contrast to Rapunzel's character. But they designed Flynn making sure there was vulnerability and light in his eyes because the team was aware that making him too macho or too pretty instead of sincere in their musical would make him unlikable. Sorry Boys, I Don't Sing works because it's not a meta joke, commentating on past Disney musicals, but more because it's planting for later payoff, because Flynn will eventually sing, moved by his love for Rapunzel. But every other man after Flynn is an asshole who makes cringy meta jokes about the Disney Princess franchise. And think about it, every single one of these characters at the 11th hour, they pull out some ass pull of a sad backstory so you can see Maui or Kristoff or whatever, oh, but they have a soft side. No, they fucking don't. They're just copying from Tangled. Maui never has a moment that is musically sincere, and neither does Kristoff, and that cuts off the audience to being endeared to them. They are just Flynn 2.0 and Flynn 2.0, but without any sincerity. I could go on, but my point is, there is a method to the madness. These choices were originally made for the sake of the story in mind. But what the movies after Tangled do is look at these choices without understanding why they were made, and they just steal them from Tangled. Alan Menken at least went into Tangled knowing that it would be a hybrid, and so he composed accordingly with the hybrid style in mind, making the choice to have Joni Mitchell be the inspiration and balancing that with the more traditional Broadway style when they could. But that is not something that should have just been blindly copied and pasted onto every movie musical since. And what do the songwriters since Tangled really get to work with? What kind of pipeline are they brought into that is seemingly influenced by this hybrid storytelling? My interpretation of what the Lopez's were saying was that they were working on Frozen when it was barely an idea, which means they were getting jerked around as plot beats rose and fell apart, as characters were created and deleted and changed and whatever. It doesn't sound like that Disney came to the Lopez's with, here's our script treatment, what do you think about retooling this into a musical, like with what happened in the case of Little Mermaid and Beauty and the Beast, right? It sounds like the Lopez's were involved so early that like a retooling of the script couldn't even be done because one didn't exist. They hadn't made one. They weren't brought on to retool a script and make it into a musical. They were just making songs that were playing around with concepts until eventually those concepts developed more. And that's how they ended up, I'm assuming, with 27 different songs. And presumably dozens of revisions to those 27 songs. The solution to this is not simply bring the songwriters on earlier. That's where Tangled went wrong. It's about not bringing them in too early or too late in the process so they can make key storytelling decisions. At Disney, they work on everything simultaneously, but is that the best way to work in terms of making a musical? Was there a script retooling process for Frozen 2? I don't know. I wasn't there, but I feel confident in saying that if there was a retooling process during Frozen 2, that the songwriters would have, if it was within their discretion to, made a decision about the voice that was calling Elsa, because musical theater songwriters understand how important it is for there to be a thematic question to be presented at the beginning, threaded through the narrative, and answered by the end. But because the creative team disagreed about who the voice was less than a year before the movie released, the Lopez's could not properly thread that through the music in a way that was not rushed, and no other department could really foreshadow what the answer was either. Show Yourself as a song was thrown under the bus as a problem in the documentary, as I mentioned earlier, but they were in what I believe was an unfair situation. They were not allowed to make that final decision and sit the screenwriter down and tell her, this is what we're going to do. But they were also not told who the voice was either. They were blamed for the song feeling vague, as if they were just supposed to read minds, but they could not do what Howard Ashman would have done. Is it too much of a stretch to say that Howard Ashman, or even the later Disney lyricists during the Renaissance, would not have tolerated this level of indecision? I get the impression through everything we know about people like Ashman, or even Schwartz, that they would have just outright said, no, your idea is bad. This needs to be clear. This is what we're doing now, and we're going to retool the entire script to do that. I mean, we know that Schwartz left Tangled because he wasn't going to budge on things he thought were creatively more compelling and more well-suited to the story. Schwartz quite literally did not tolerate it. He left the project. Anyway, eventually, the Lopez's were the ones who suggested for the voice to be Elsa's mother, but it felt less like a moment of revelation and more like, we have literally no idea what you want and we have tried everything, so what about this? And Jennifer Lee just agreed. It wasn't their choice for the story, it was the last possible option after spending way too long trying to appease an indecisive creative team. Do you guys understand what I'm saying here? It doesn't really matter who the goddamn voice was. Like, what matters is that the Lopez's had it on their shoulders to execute this perfect thematic payoff. Like, this is the climax of the movie, when the screenwriters didn't even do the setup, and they didn't know what the payoff should be either, so how could the songwriters possibly do anything? Even though, as I said, I perceive this as a company-wide issue, I have a feeling that this may also be, in this case, how Jennifer Lee works, period. Because for Wish, Julia Michaels wrote Asha's I Want song from a synopsis of like what the story would be, like a concept, and Jennifer Lee was just like, great, that's our guiding star for the entire movie, for writing the entire movie, was that song, despite that song literally having nothing in it that identified it as being part of Wish musically or lyrically. And I guess now we sort of know why. How could it possibly? She had literally no information to go off of. Jennifer Lee tried to like write the rest of the story based off of that, and Julia Michaels isn't a storyteller. In a similar way, I'm a Star was written with only some of the script, whatever that means. It seems like that everything here was just like written off of vibes, and Julia Michaels does not have the same skill as the Lopez's to turn vibes into story. story. It seems that Lin-Manuel Miranda fared a little better with his projects, since for Encanto in particular, he had enough creative license to do certain things, like he wrote the big opening number for Encanto to prove that a big family cast could be introduced easily, because I guess some executives didn't think that it could, even though in a musical you have big casts introduced easily all the time, but okay. He got to pitch songs also like We Don't Talk About Bruno, and so we do know that he got some say. The directors mentioned this in an interview. We started talking to Lin on day one, which is really unusual. We usually don't get our songwriters until very late in the game, and this made a huge difference. You don't say! However, even with Encanto, they are working a little bit odd. Once we started working on the screenplay and started doing early screenings and working on it in a more focused way, we would identify moments that could be song moments. We would then send Lin what we were thinking and what characters were feeling during the song. He would come back to us with something totally genius and blow us all away. Castro Smith notes that oftentimes listening to Miranda's songs helped the directors understand the characters even better. So he was there from day one, but then you told him where to put the songs after early screening? Okay, Anyway, and this is from the same article, the unique collaboration also pays off when a song isn't the right choice for a particular scene. Bush found this out the hard way. This is one of the same guys, I believe, that worked on Tangled. If an area doesn't want to be a song, you can't make it be a song, he explains. One of the early things I fought for was a song, and I kept telling everyone, it's gotta be in there. Lin kept saying, I don't think it will work. So he tried a version of it, we screened it, and it super didn't work. The movie will tell you if it's song-worthy or not. But sometimes you have to go on that journey to find out. Do you? The movie will tell you if a moment is song-worthy? It sounds like to me, 3-time Tony winner, 5-time Grammy winner Lin-Manuel Miranda told you it wasn't gonna work, and you didn't listen. The movie didn't tell you that the song wasn't going to work. He did, and you made him do it anyway. What a waste of everyone's time when you're saying that you do not trust the songwriter on that and make them write a song just so we can find out. What the fuck? But going back to the other quote, please. They started doing screenings and then started to put the songs in. That's a little bit confusing. Like they were telling Lin where they thought the songs would go and what the characters were feeling. They say he was there from day one, and like I said, we all know that he pitched songs to be created, but it also sounds like that they were telling him where songs should go. And I'm not surprised that the songs help the directors understand the characters even better, because that's the fucking point. It just feels like even though Lin's influence helped a lot here, we still see the remnants of this inefficient process. The process could have been easier if they retooled the script with his influence from the beginning, rather than the directors or the writers discovering things about the character after giving Lin vague instructions. I also found Lin-Manuel Miranda saying in 2 separate instances that the music has got to match these incredible visuals, which again concerns me that even if he got more free reign, that the priority is still visuals first. And he also has another quote which is a bit better, where it says, visuals inform music and music informs the visuals, always in service of the story. But the fact that the visuals inform music, like that comes first, worries me a little bit. Connecting back to the process, he said about Mufasa, the only song I pitched to Barry that wasn't in the script was a song for Kyros, who's the big villain. I was like, let me write the villain song. We haven't had a big bad villain in a minute. Barry is the director. So am I understanding this correctly, that all of the songs and their placement were already decided on before Lin-Manuel Miranda even got there? That fucking sucks! For Barlow and Bear, we knew that they were taken through the script and told by people at the animation offices, where the animation office people felt like the songs went, with the script already written, right? But that was a TV show, and that's standard TV show practice. TV shows are not necessarily musicals. TV shows usually have this mandate of like 2 songs per episode, and the plot is sometimes disconnected from each other, like there's musicality, but if you were to actually stage it like a real musical, like it just wouldn't work. Even something like the Tangled TV series, it just wouldn't work. Whereas Disney movie musicals have always been, this could be a traditional Broadway show, but it's animated. But this quote was the most befuddling to me, talking about the story meetings for Moana, and so, if you watch the Frozen 2 documentary, you get an idea of what the story meetings could have been like, but we don't know. What we do know is that Lin said, and that was my favorite part of the process, and getting to meekly raise my hand and being like, I think a song could do that better, that was my way into the room. Meekly? Lin-Manuel Miranda was meekly raising his hand saying, I think a song could do that better? Like my brother in Christ, what are you talking about? Is that better? Or worse than Alan Menken feeling like he had to zip it? Or saying that he went, sorry, I'll try again, ... exclamation point, instead of getting defensive and saying, guys, this is what we talked about, even though to me that is a perfectly valid response in my eyes. And this is where you could say my world had somehow shifted, because what Lin-Manuel Miranda said reminded me that there was something else in the Glenn Slater interview earlier that I briefly mentioned, but I hadn't fully appreciated before, and it felt like my eyes were open.
What do you think about the work of the late Howard Ashman? Well, I mean, he was sort of a genius, so it's hard not to be both immensely impressed and slightly intimidated. It's a little bit of a sore spot for me because I've been working in his shadow for 15 years, and it's a pretty big shadow to get out from under. Howard was fairly unique in that he wasn't just a lyricist, and he was also able to write music, but he was also a director, and he was a producer. So he kind of had his hands in every aspect of the theater and had a sort of a mastery of it. And it served extremely well when he got to Disney because he was able to sort of take charge. At the time we got there, their animation department was sort of falling apart. They hadn't had a hit in years and years, and everybody running it was still fairly young and green, and he was able to walk in and say, okay, this is how you do a musical, and he had a receptive audience there, and they kind of turned the reins over to him and let him run with it. And because he was so good at so many different things, he was able to really sort of pull everything together and create kind of, almost like a new art form, because the animated musical hadn't really been anything like what he ended up doing with, which is incredibly impressive and something that nobody has really been able to do since, because nobody's come into that role with that range of talents and that opportunity. It's very hard to do what he did when you're not Howard Ashman, when you don't have the presence and the charisma of a director and the experience of a producer and a sort of, a power structure that's willing to put those reins in your hands and let you run. It's been interesting trying to live up to his legend and, finding it both incredibly inspiring and kind of frustrating.
Why hasn't anyone been able to do what Howard Ashman did since? Glenn Slater would tell you that is why. Disney's massive problem is a refusal to put the reins in the hands of their songwriters. And the reason why I wanted to end off with that Lin-Manuel Miranda quote is because sure, with people like Julia Michaels, I don't think that she should be in charge of developing a story. She's never done it before. But if you are not going to put the reins in the hands of Lin-Manuel Miranda, forgive me, who the fuck are you going to let exert control over your screenwriters or your directors? This cannot possibly be a situation where there is no one worthy enough to take the reins, because Lin-Manuel Miranda, by all accounts, should have the clout. Even the Lopez's, in my eyes, should have the clout. They are the best part of Frozen, especially Frozen 2. They earned it, and Alan Menken should definitely have the goddamn clout. What are we doing here? Why are we operating within a structure where the songwriters have less and less creative input, are left to fend for themselves to varying degrees of success, with other departments being too indecisive or too strict, where even Lin-Manuel Miranda is just being told, oh, insert song here? That is not how things are supposed to be. If Lin-Manuel Miranda, of all people, has to meekly raise his hand during story meetings, if Alan Menken feels like he has to zip it because the directors want to establish their own ground and do things their way, who in the world can tell these screenwriters and these directors that they don't know what they're doing? And I hear some of you typing, Cal, that's kinda mean. That's a mean thing to say, but I'm not saying that they're stupid. I'm saying that a lot of them don't know what they're doing, and that's okay. But what's not okay is the fact that a lot of them know that they don't know, but don't want to relinquish that control, which is what makes it so frustrating. Jennifer Lee said during the Frozen 2 documentary that to get the story and music to speak together is an extraordinary amount of work, and that would not be so bad by itself if not for everything else that went on Show Yourself that keeps playing in the back of my head. I'm sorry to be harsh because I saw through that documentary how much they all care, but think about it. That was the level of incompetence that Disney was comfortable showing to the public. They put that on Disney Plus for all of us to see. What do you think they aren't talking about? What in the world do they think would actually make them look bad? It should not have been as difficult as it was in that documentary. And if you find it an extraordinary amount of work to get the story and the music to speak together, you have absolutely no business being in charge of a musical. You may know the animation side of things better, but you need to co-direct with the musical theater talent because you do not know anything about the musical theater side of things. You just don't. Despite the scared straight speech that Glenn Slater got and how he describes feeling frustrated that he has to live up to Ashman without having the same creative control that Ashman got, some ideas he did suggest for Tangled did make it through. He actually talks about having suggested I've Got a Dream because he and Menken both felt like there needed to be a song there in terms of the pacing of the story, and that there also weren't enough characters outside of Gothel, Rapunzel, and Flynn. So someone came back with the script and wrote a scene with the thieves in the pub doing a poetry slam. And Glenn Slater said, I can't build an entire song off of that, but what if I keep the idea of these tough guys doing sensitive things and build out of that? And they told him to just go off and do whatever he wanted. And because he got to do whatever he wanted, it meant he got to set up the rhythm of the jokes with each thief. He got to build towards forcing Flynn to sing and then having Rapunzel sing at the very end. He got to set up the objective of the song and pay off what the song promises and also work that into the theme for the entire movie. The idea of Flynn and Rapunzel's dream at this time compared to later on is so important for the story and their character development that it's hard to imagine not having that contrast. Glenn Slater also suggested after doing this that the thieves had to return at the end because he had made the audience care about them. The audience would be expecting that they came back somehow. So he made sure that we got that payoff. And I think I've Got a Dream is one of the best sequences in the entire movie, with some of the best lyrics in any Disney song post-Renaissance. Yes, it's silly, and Alan Menken has said, oh, this is so goofy, this is so stupid a couple times. He has said that about the song, but I really like the song. And that's the type of thing that you get when you let the songwriters do what they are supposed to do. Because Glenn Slater did not just get to lyric right, he got to write. The solution here to me is incredibly simple. Glenn Slater had it, and I agree. The people that know how to make musicals should be the ones making them. Round of applause for me, I know, but there's no reason why the songwriters can't at least share some directorial power from my perspective. But the question is, does Disney even want to do that? I think that Disney wants these hybrids and that the people who are in charge of directing and screenwriting will be reluctant to share the power they have, and so hybrids are what we are going to get. And Alan Menken sort of foreshadowed this in the interview where he answered the question about where the state of the movie musical is now, and talking about like, oh, on one side you get traditional, on the other side you get The Emperor's New Groove and Tarzan, which are more pop driven, and then you get these things in the middle. The things in the middle are safer. They make more money. But in pursuit of that, we are abandoning this art form. I truly believe that in their minds, the visuals are above all else now, and the songs are just excuses to have these stunning visual sequences, or so you can have something for the sake of marketing, or tools to dig the screenwriters out of the holes that they created. And maybe you think that's cynical of me to think, but after everything that we have talked about, how can I not think that? We haven't even talked about the rumors about Lin-Manuel Miranda getting censored while working on Mufasa. We didn't even touch where you see in terms of the Frozen 2 documentary in real time that they are dumbing down the storytelling because they think that, I don't know, children will get confused, I guess. So we move away from the sincerity to have Olaf do like a little exposition about what happened in the first Frozen. I'm also going to feel a little bit cynical when Alan Menken and Glenn Slater are working for Disney's competitor, and when asking about working on Spellbound, they talk about what attracted them most to the project was being able to create the journey. And when asked in this same interview who decides where the songs go, Alan Menken responded that they do. As in him and Glenn Slater. They decided where the songs go. They also say that working with people you trust enables you not to feel like you're locked into a set plot. They talk about wanting certain songs in moments and then making sure they went back and earned them throughout the journey. It sounds like that maybe they retooled the script. Say what you want about it. I mean, I think that Spellbound does still have a little bit of Pixar stank, but it doesn't seem like Alan Menken felt the need to zip it when he was working on Spellbound. I'm going to leave you with the words of Glen Keane after he resigned from Disney, his experience during the production of Tangled influencing his decision, saying, "I did work on it for 5 years, but it came at a time where there were so many changes in management, everything just kept changing, and there would be another version of the story." There's so many interests in a big company, and I experienced that very much with Rapunzel, how many different focuses of management and interest were in the changes of that story. And he said that he wanted to live creatively without walls. Then Glen Keane moved to Netflix to work on Over the Moon, which has songs, coincidentally, written by Christopher Curtis, who wrote the original deleted demo songs for Tangled. If you want to hear more about all of that, you can check out this video about Rapunzel's I Want song Evolution. But I do think that it's an interesting coincidence that Glen Keane and Chris Curtis both ended up working on a movie musical for Netflix, and Alan Menken and Glenn Slater just finished working on a musical movie that ended up on Netflix but was made by Disney's competitor. That and the night and day difference in terms of how they talk about their experiences working on those movies in comparison to Tangled. I hope we continue to see people live creatively without walls, and I hope that these companies understand that if Disney is not going to do this, if they are not going to provide us with the traditional fairy tale musical movie anymore, that there is a space in the market for that. People still want that, and that we will be there to support it. A lot of the time, you guys will say, oh, Disney needs to see this video. Disney needs to listen to you. But you guys have to understand that that is not going to happen. You need to start creating. You cannot wait for the day that the big company decides that they want to make art again. And so this has been Calxiyn, caring way too much. And I hope now that you'll care too. Go out there and live creatively without walls. And I will see you next time. Bye!